My son told me I had 1 week to pack my things and leave the house I had lived in for 31 years. He said it calmly, the way you might tell someone the weather had changed. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, and behind him I could see his wife nodding slowly like she had rehearsed this moment for a long time. Maybe she had. My husband had only been in the ground for 11 days. I remember looking down at my hands. They were wrapped around a coffee mug, the blue one with the chipped handle that my husband had refused to throw away for years. I remember thinking that the coffee had gone cold and I had not noticed. "Mom, it's just practical," my son said. "The house is too big for one person. We've already talked to a realtor." I did not cry. I want you to know that. I did not cry in front of him. I had given that house everything. I had painted every room by hand. I had planted the roses along the back fence the spring after my daughter was born. I had sat in the window of the upstairs bedroom during 3 separate storms, watching water collect along the gutters, making sure the roof held. And when my husband got sick, really sick, the kind that lasts 2 years and takes everything out of you slowly, I had been the one who slept in the chair beside his bed so he would not wake up alone in the dark. My son had visited 4 times during those 2 years. 4 times. His wife had come twice. But the house, they explained, was in probate. My husband had died without updating certain documents. Everything was being sorted. And while it was being sorted, they felt it would be best if I stayed somewhere else. Somewhere smaller. My son mentioned a senior living community 40 minutes away. He had already looked into it. I put the coffee mug in the sink and told him I would think about it. That night I sat in my husband's study for a long time. The room still smelled like him, like cedar and old books, and the particular soap he had used for 40 years. I was not looking for anything. I was just sitting in the chair he had always sat in, and I think I needed to feel close to him because I did not know what else to do. The envelope was in the bottom drawer of his desk, underneath a folder of tax returns from 2019. It was a regular white envelope, sealed, with my name written on the front in his handwriting. Not my full name. Just what he had called me since the day we met. Just Ellie. I held it for a long time before I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds, and a small business card. The paper was a letter in his handwriting, not typed, handwritten, and it was dated 8 months before he died. 8 months. He had known the illness was serious by then. He had known, and he had planned ahead, and he had not told me because he had known I would worry. The letter was not long. He wrote that he loved me. He wrote that he was sorry he could not protect me from what he knew might be coming. He wrote that he had made arrangements a long time ago, when our son was still young, and he had first started to understand the kind of man his son was becoming. He wrote that he had hoped he would be wrong. He wrote that he did not think he was wrong. Then he wrote, "Take the business card to Mr. Gerald Patterson at Patterson & Associates in Millbrook. Tell him you are Eleanor Voss. Show him this letter. He will explain everything. Do not go with anyone else. Go alone." The business card was old. The edges had gone soft. The address listed an office on Crane Street in Millbrook, which was a town about 25 miles from where we lived. The card had a phone number with an area code I recognized. I put the letter and the card back in the envelope. I put the envelope in my cardigan pocket. I went to bed, and I did not sleep. The next morning I told my son I needed to run some errands. He nodded without looking up from his phone. His wife was eating yogurt at my kitchen table. I took my car keys from the hook by the door, the hook I had installed myself in 1997, and I drove to Millbrook. Patterson & Associates was on the 2nd floor of a brick building on Crane Street, above a dry cleaner. The staircase was narrow, and the carpet was burgundy, and worn thin in the middle. I almost turned around twice on the way up. I kept thinking about how my husband had known about this place. I kept thinking about the date on that letter. The receptionist was a young woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head. I told her my name was Eleanor Voss and that I needed to speak with Gerald Patterson. I told her it was regarding my late husband, Thomas Voss. She looked up at me. Something shifted in her expression, not alarm exactly, but attention. She asked me to wait 1 moment. Gerald Patterson was older than I expected. He had to have been in his late 70s, with white hair and the kind of careful, deliberate way of moving that suggested he had been doing this work for a very long time and had learned not to rush anything. He came out of his office himself instead of sending his receptionist. He shook my hand with both of his. "Mrs. Voss," he said. "I wondered when you would come." He led me into his office and closed the door. The office was full of books and files and framed photographs of people I did not recognize. He gestured to a chair across from his desk and I sat down. He sat across from me and folded his hands on the desk and looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. I put the envelope on the desk and slid it toward him. He looked at it but did not touch it. "Your husband called me about 8 months before he passed," he said. He was very specific about what he wanted and very specific about the conditions. He wanted to make sure that certain things were protected, that you were protected. He paused. "He was a careful man, your husband." "I know," I said. Gerald Patterson opened a file drawer and removed a manila folder. It was thick. He set it on the desk in front of him and opened it, and I could see pages of documents inside, legal documents, dense with text, stamped and signed and notarized. "Mrs. Voss," he said, "I need to ask you a few questions before I explain everything, just to verify. Can you tell me the name of the street you grew up on?" "Birchwood," I said. "Birchwood Lane in Davenport." My husband knew that. He nodded and made a small mark on a pad of paper. "And the name of the restaurant where you had your first date?" I almost smiled. "Rafferty's. It closed in 1989. He nodded again. He looked at the folder, and then he looked back at me, and I had the distinct feeling that whatever he was about to say had been sitting in this office for months, waiting. "Your husband came to me in March of last year," Gerald Patterson said. "He had become concerned that certain aspects of your financial situation were not structured in a way that would protect you after he was gone. He had some concerns about, and I want to be delicate about this, about certain family dynamics." "You mean our son?" I said. "Yes," he said simply. "He was concerned about your son." He explained it carefully, in the way that good lawyers explain things thoroughly, without rushing, making sure you understand each piece before moving to the next. My husband had not died without a plan. He had died with a very specific plan that he had kept quiet precisely because he knew that announcing it would trigger exactly the kind of conflict he was trying to prevent. 32 years ago, before our son was even born, my husband had purchased a piece of commercial property in Millbrook as an investment. The property had grown. He had added to it over the years quietly, under a separate holding entity, separate from our household accounts, because he had a cautious nature and believed in having something that was entirely separate from the ordinary business of family life. He called it his insurance policy. He had told Gerald Patterson about it, but no one else. Not even me. The holding company that owned the property was called TVE Holdings. Thomas, Vincent, and Eleanor, our initials. He had put my name in it from the beginning. The property itself was a commercial block on the main street in Millbrook, 4 storefronts, fully leased, generating consistent rental income. But the land had appreciated dramatically over the decades, and 2 years ago a regional development company had approached TVE Holdings about purchasing the entire block for a mixed-use development project. The negotiations had been ongoing. Gerald Patterson had been managing them on my husband's behalf. The offer that was currently on the table was for $1.4 million. I sat very still. "The holding company is jointly owned," Gerald Patterson said carefully. "But your husband's share 60% passes to you under the terms of the trust he established. The remaining 40% has always been in your name directly, meaning the entirety of TVE Holdings now belongs to you." I heard what he said. I understood the words, but there was a moment, maybe several seconds, maybe longer, where I sat in that chair in that office on Crane Street, and I simply could not locate any response inside myself. I felt the way you feel at very high altitude, like the air had changed. "There is also," Gerald Patterson continued, removing another set of documents from the folder, "the matter of the investment account your husband maintained through a separate brokerage. It is not a large account by some measures, but it is not insignificant." He turned a page toward me and pointed to a number. The investment account held just over $240,000. I thought about my son, 40 minutes away at that moment, probably on his phone, probably discussing square footage and listing prices with his wife. I thought about the way he had stood in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed. I thought about 11 days. My husband had been gone for 11 days when my son started talking to realtors. "Does my son know about any of this?" I asked. "No," Gerald Patterson said. "Your husband was very clear on that point. The trust documents were structured specifically to ensure the assets were not visible during probate. Legally, they pass outside of the estate. Your son has no claim to them and no knowledge of them. What do I do now? I asked. He smiled a small, calm smile. That, he said, is entirely up to you. I drove home in a kind of silence I had never experienced before. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of something very large settling into place. When I got back to the house, my son was in the living room reviewing documents with a woman in a blazer who I did not recognize. Real estate, I assumed. He introduced her without much interest. The way you introduce someone when you are confident about how a conversation is going to go. He told me they were discussing some options for the property. I sat down in the armchair by the window, my armchair. The one I had reupholstered myself 3 years ago in a blue fabric I had driven 2 hours to find, and I looked at him. I think we need to talk, I said. When your friend is finished. The woman in the blazer left about 10 minutes later. My son sat across from me on the couch, in the posture of someone who expects to be thanked for his patience. I told him I had spent the morning meeting with a lawyer. The posture changed. I told him about TVE Holdings. I did not tell him the full number right away. I let him sit with the knowledge that it existed. I watched his face do things I had never seen it do before, move through surprise and confusion and something that looked uncomfortably like fear. Dad never told me about this, he said. No, I said. He didn't. Why would he set something up and not tell the family? I looked at him for a moment. He told me, I said. He told me today, in a letter. My son stood up. He began to pace in the way that he had done since he was a teenager, when he was trying to get control of a situation that was slipping away from him. He talked about lawyers, and about fairness, and about family. He talked about how this was not what any of them had intended. He used the word intended several times. His wife came downstairs at some point, drawn by the sound of raised voices. She stood in the doorway and watched. I let him finish. Then I told him the offer that was on the table for the commercial property. I told him the number slowly and clearly. I watched them both process it. Then I told them something else. Gerald Patterson, in our meeting, had advised me about my options regarding the house. The house that was in probate. The house my son had assumed would pass to him through the estate once the paperwork resolved. Gerald Patterson had explained, carefully and precisely, that the way my husband had structured certain community property arrangements, combined with the length of our marriage, and the contributions I had documented over decades, meant that my legal position regarding the home was significantly stronger than my son had apparently been led to believe by whoever he had consulted. In other words, the house was not as settled as my son thought. I haven't made any decisions yet, I told him. About the house or the commercial property or any of it, Gerald Patterson has advised me to take some time. My son sat back down. The pacing had stopped. His wife had moved from the doorway to the couch and was sitting beside him, and for the first time since I had entered that kitchen 11 days ago, I did not feel like someone being managed. I want you to understand something, I said. I am not angry. I want to say that clearly, because what I am about to tell you is not coming from anger. I paused. But things are going to be different. I am going to meet with Gerald Patterson again next week, and I am going to make decisions about my future based on what is right for me, not based on what is convenient for anyone else. My son opened his mouth. I also want you to cancel whatever you have scheduled with the realtor, I said. This house is not being listed. Not yet. Not until I decide what I want to do with it. The room was very quiet. That night, after they had gone upstairs and closed their door, I sat in my husband's study again. I had the letter in my hands. I had read it so many times by then that I had memorized it, but I kept reading it anyway because I liked having it in my hands. He had known. Not everything, perhaps, but enough. He had known that there might come a time when the people who should have protected me would not, and so he had spent 32 years building something quiet and separate and steady, and he had put my name in it from the beginning, and he had trusted Gerald Patterson to hold it until I was ready to come. I thought about what ready means. I had not felt ready when I walked up those narrow stairs in Millbrook. I had not felt ready when I sat across from Gerald Patterson and heard him turn pages in that thick folder. But I had been ready. I had just not known it yet. The development company's offer remained open for 60 days. Gerald Patterson believed there was room to negotiate upward. The location was valuable. They wanted the whole block, and we were the only seller. He thought we might reach 1.6, possibly 1.7 with the right approach. He had a commercial real estate attorney he worked with on situations like this. He would make the introduction when I was ready. I accepted 2 weeks later. The final number was $1.62 million. I did not list the house. I stayed in it. My son and his wife moved out in March, a decision that came after several long conversations and one very difficult evening around the kitchen table that I will not describe in detail, except to say that by the end of it, certain things had been said that needed to be said, and certain understandings had been reached that should have been reached years ago. My son is not a bad man. He had allowed himself to become someone I did not recognize, and I believe that the weeks after his father's death had made him worse than he ordinarily was. I am not ready to call it grief, but I am willing to leave some room for it. We are working on things. Slowly, the investment account I kept largely intact. Gerald Patterson connected me with a financial advisor who helped me understand what I had and how to make it work for the long term. I moved some of it. I made one decision that was entirely my own, that had nothing to do with practicality or investment strategy or anyone's advice. In the spring, I established a small scholarship fund through the community college in Millbrook, the town where my husband had bought that property 32 years ago, a town I had driven through 100 times without knowing it held anything of mine. The scholarship is for women over 50 who are returning to school, women who are starting over, women who need to know that starting over is possible. I named it after my husband. I named it after what he had called me in that letter, just Ellie. The Thomas and Eleanor Voss Scholarship for Returning Students. The first recipient was a woman named Patricia, who had raised 4 children and was going back to school to become a licensed practical nurse. She sent me a card in the mail when she found out. The card had sunflowers on the front. I put it on the windowsill in the kitchen, next to the blue mug with the chipped handle. Some mornings I sit at the kitchen table with my coffee, and I look at that card and I think about my husband sitting at his desk 32 years ago, writing my initials into a document alongside his, making something that belonged to both of us. He used to say that the best kind of love is the kind that keeps working even when you are not in the room. I did not understand what he meant when he said it. I understand now.